people think nuclear...
The renewable sector generate the
question, Hinkley Point.
The North Sea in this country.
Countries aren't going to give us that base provision that gives us the industrial underpinning that we require.
I guess I should start by apologising for not being Fergus Ewing. I guess this, for those of you who'd applied to come here when Fergus was listed as a speaker, this must feel like when you order your shopping and forget to tick no substitute items, so I'll try and at least live up to expectations. I think when we look at the energy future, I think we're looking at challenges and opportunities basically, which is always the case, but I think what are the challenges and opportunities over the sort of coming 5 years and beyond? I think given where we are and the likely makeup of the audience, it would be remiss not to begin from the oil and gas industry, and in particular the impact of low oil price. Now, while that obviously has a benefit from a consumption perspective, nonetheless we know here in the North East that it's having a significant impact in terms of jobs, in terms of investment. So from a Scottish Government perspective, we've taken steps where we can. We've introduced a transition training fund for those individuals who find themselves being made redundant in a bid to try and get them to go on to other employment and move on to other areas, particularly looking at how we could link up with the renewables sector and use some of that expertise to cross over into renewables. We've introduced a business innovation fund to support those businesses which are obviously facing some difficulties at present, and as well as that, there's a wider infrastructure investment programme which is about making sure that some of the costs that are being faced by businesses as a consequence of infrastructure in the North East are addressed as well. There are still opportunities, however, within the oil and gas industry. I think there are opportunities in terms of internationalisation. While the cost of production in the North East is obviously higher than the price of oil at present, and that presents challenges for companies. There are areas out there globally where that is not the case, where the cost of production is below the price of oil, and that is areas where we would like to offer opportunities to companies and support to companies who want to internationalise, who want to maybe gain a foothold in some of these markets while remaining anchored in the North East and within Scotland. And there's also the opportunity to continue to be an exporter of knowledge, expertise and skills to other parts of the globe as well, and that's something which we're keen to support. I think exploration has been the missing piece of the jigsaw in terms of the measures that the UK government have taken so far. I visited a company quite recently who were telling me that for every exploration rig that is out there, this is a supply chain company, it's worth £250,000 to that company. So 4 rigs is £1 million onto their turnover, and at the moment there are none out there exploring that they've got any contracts with, and therefore that's worth 0 to them. So it's a big impact on the supply chain. It also offers the opportunity to protect some jobs in the immediate term, and also allows for the industry to be in a position to capitalise on discoveries made during that exploration period when the price picks up, as it is expected it will do so, possibly towards the tail end of this year. In terms of renewables, I think we've seen a significant shift in Scotland. We've doubled our total output from renewables since 2007. We have 57% of Scotland's electricity needs being met from renewables, and that has exceeded the 50% target that we set for 2015. We've seen £14 billion of investment in the renewables sector, which I think has been driven and supported by the Scottish Government setting an ambitious target of 100% equivalent of electricity by 2020. We're undertaking a range of work about supporting skills, knowledge, and offering the opportunity for Scotland to be seen as a major place for renewables expansion and investment. And I think the challenges that exist relate firstly to the subsidy cuts that have been implemented by the UK government in relation to solar and wind, which I think has put a lot of investors off potentially investing in Scotland. I think that there is a serious need for Ofgem to look at the transmission charging regime and how that impacts upon Scotland. We have a situation now where some of the most fertile areas for energy production face some of the most punitive charges to connect to the grid, and that equation for me is entirely the wrong way around. Indeed, the transmission charging regime was one of the factors, not the factor, but one of the factors which contributed to the closure of Longannet, the costs that were being faced by Longannet to connect to the grid, despite the fact that it was a significant producer in terms of energy. And again, I think the pulling of the rug out from the carbon capture and storage scheme that was being planned for Peterhead, I think is a huge missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity to harness skills, expertise and economic opportunity in the northeast of Scotland. That I think is something that the UK government is going to live to regret, because it means that the possibility is there now for other areas to advance this technology and become world leaders, when it could have been Scotland that could have been at the forefront of that. But we'll continue to support any efforts to look at the possibility of carbon capture and storage, but that's obviously going to be very difficult to do from a Scotland-only perspective in the near future. In terms of what we want to achieve over the next 5 years, we've set out that we're going to look to develop a new energy strategy. That will involve input from stakeholders across the energy sector, and Neil will be delighted to know that we've committed in our manifesto to looking at the possibility of the 50% renewable target that Scottish Renewables have put forward. But one of the things that I'm quite excited about is the issue around community ownership and benefit, because I think that one of the things we've done over the last Parliament is looked at community empowerment. How can we make communities more involved in the decisions that are taken and what happens? And I've seen a range of fantastic community energy projects which are benefiting Scotland in terms of energy production, but also benefiting communities in terms of economic benefit. So we're going to look by 2020 to have 1 gigawatt of community owned and locally owned energy, 2 gigawatts by 2030. We want half of all newly consented renewable energy projects by 2020 to have an element of shared ownership, and we're going to investigate the possibility of a government-owned energy company to help the growth of local and community energy projects. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to finish by touching on the issues that Tom raised in terms of fracking. There's a moratorium in place, and that's been put in place because we are sceptical, as the First Minister has said, about fracking. We think that there are a number of unanswered questions. All in the US garden is not necessarily rosy in relation to fracking. There are a number of concerns that are being raised at a US level. And I think it's a very difficult proposition to say that the central belt of Scotland is comparable necessarily to North Dakota, for example. I mean, population density alone puts those as two very different areas to look at when you're looking at the questions around environmental impact, health impact and safety impact. So the moratorium is about looking at those concerns and making sure, first and foremost, that if there are any doubts around those, the First Minister has been quite clear that we will not take forward fracking in the next Parliament. There's a question about whether you can and whether you should, and those are two very different questions that need to be weighed up with the evidence that will be gathered during the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Many people think nuclear.
The renewable sector generate the
question of Hinkley
the
Point.
North Sea in this
Brodies
country.
aren't going to give us that base provision that gives us the industrial underpinning that we require.